In this video, we're going to take an in-depth look at Synthmaster One, and by the end of the video, you'll have a solid foundation in how to access and use all of the features and parameters of this VST synth. Now, we will be experimenting with some sounds during this tutorial, but I also recently created a full track using 8 instances of Synthmaster One. It was the only VST that I used, so if you'd like to have a better idea of the sonic capabilities of this synth, you can always check out the link up above in the upper right hand corner. Now for the first 120 seconds, we're going to go through a few technical things, get these out of the way, and while they're not the most exciting things, they're important to be aware of, and it'll just take a moment. First of all, if you're not happy with the current skin that your Synthmaster One has, you can always right click on the interface, and then here near the bottom we have Change Global Skin, and you have a variety of different skins and scales to choose from. So the one I'm currently using is the white, and I have it set to 120%. Now we can also access the Synthmaster One user manual, but hopefully you won't need that by the end of this video. We can check for our updates as well, choose if our mouse wheel is reversed or whether our keyboard input is enabled. Let's click out of there. Now at the very top to the left we have undo and redo, which is going to be useful if you're going to be programming within Synthmaster One. We then have our voices. This is going to default to 16 voices, but we can click and choose up to 32 voices. We then have our preset name. We can see our CPU usage, the number of voices that are currently playing back. Now, in order to initialize Synthmaster One, we can left click and choose init. We then have our mode, which we can choose between poly or monophonic. We then have save. And if you're going to be doing programming and saving your own presets, just be aware that along with this save button, at the bottom left-hand corner, we have attributes. And so if we've created a patch that we'd like to save, we can always put the name of the author in, our bank name, the company, a description, and we can choose the instrument type, the attributes, and then add these to our preset. We also have the option to add a new style. We can name that here. We can add a new attribute as well. Let's close that out and remove these and come back to our keyboard view. Make our way back up to the top. We then have our browse. Most of us are familiar with browsing in synthesizers. Just know that we are going to default to our preset library. There is an audio shop where you can purchase sound libraries, but we can filter these out. By default, we're going to be on all. Synthmaster One has over 1,000, over 1,200 different presets. We can filter these, so if we're looking for bass, we can choose bass. If we'd like 808, we can select that. It shows then in our presets. Let's come to analog. We can see we have more of those. We can then further filter by style. So if we'd like dance, and we can also filter by author. Now we can clear these settings quickly by clicking on the trash can icon there. And notice here that we are on local. So this is going to display all of the presets that have been installed on our local hard drive. Now if we come to online, this is going to download presets that other Synthmaster One users have created. You'll be able to make use of those. Those are not curated, so you may have some duds, but just know if you'd like to expand your library, you can do that for free by clicking on the online button. Now, once we filter out our presets, then we can always just click in the field here, and that's going to update to the preset that we've selected. We can then use the left and right arrows here to navigate to the next ones in this selection. Let's come back to our synth view by clicking on the synth button. We then have our master tuning and master volume. Let's again left click and initialize. Okay, so now let's get on with the fun stuff, and we'll start by taking a look at the oscillators, and we're going to focus on oscillator 1. And then once we've learned everything here, then that will pertain exactly to our oscillator 2 and sub 2. So we've got 2 stereo oscillators within Synthmaster. We've got 2 sub-oscillators. Now, the sub-oscillators have multiple functions. If we click on the sub here, we can see that we can also use these as modulators for our oscillator 1, our main oscillator. So we could use this as an amp modulator, ring, phase, or frequency modulation. Now, while this is in the sub mode, so we just click once and we can choose ring mod and then use that as a ring modulator. Let's come back to the sub. Now, if we click in this window in sub mode, We can also use this as a noise oscillator. We also have waveforms here that we can choose from, and we can choose audio input as well. Now for our main oscillator, we're going to start off on a standard saw. If we click on the window here, we can see the basic ideal waveforms: sine, triangle, square, and sawtooth, pulse. But we also have waveforms here. So if you're looking for waveforms with more character, these have been sampled from classic and vintage hardware synthesizers. So we've got analog here. You can see, you can pretty much tell where these are coming from: Andromeda, Base Station, the Fatty, Mini 20, OB, Prophet, Juno. So a ton of flexibility if you are looking for, say, sawtooths with different character that are sampled from the hardware synths. We've got a couple here from BT. We've got digital. So if you'd like to work with FM, then we can choose that as well. Let's come back to the top and click again. We then have our wavetables and audio input, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. But let's choose an analog here and take a look at some of the controls. We'll choose the Uno 16 sawtooth. So we've got octave control, semitone. We can choose unison. Each main oscillator can have up to 16 unison voices. Let's set this to 3. Then we can detune, spread the width of those detuned voices in the stereo field. Now, if you notice here, we have something that says algorithm. And this is going to apply spectral filtering to our selected waveform. And there are, clicking on this window here, there are 16 different algorithms in 4 categories. So by default, we're on this low pass, and we can use the tone and phase controls to adjust the filtering. So when I trigger, we can come to tone. Notice our display here updates our phase. We can click again. Let's come to the other, check out Bit Crush. Now, of course, these could be useful parameters to add modulation to, and adding modulation in Synthmaster One is very simple. We have a couple of different ways. We could right-click on the parameter in particular and come to the Add Modulation, come to LFOs. If we like LFO 1 or 2, for instance, we've also got MIDI sources, other envelopes. We have 4 different envelopes that we can choose from. Now, the other way that we can add modulation is, for instance, if we'd like LFO 1 to apply to our phase, we can click on this button, hold, drag that, then we can adjust, hover on the collar of the parameter, and adjust the depth of that. So very easy to add modulation, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. To clear, we can just right click and choose clear modulations, and that's now been removed. Now we've seen our unison and detuning and the width controls. We also have a detune curve, and this is going to change the way our detuning works with our sound. So let's trigger. We're going to have a more dramatic effect of the detuning when we take that curve up, and less when we bring that down. Let's come to our reverb, click once and activate that. Now we've got volume control and panning, volume and semitone control for our sub-oscillator. We also at the top have this free button. Now this randomizes the start phase of the oscillator waveform, and this is similar to a free running analog synth oscillator, and it's useful for supersaw type sounds. So let's actually take our unison up even higher. Let's just say 9. Now you can hear the attack on that. Take notice of the attack. Now when I activate free, we have a softer attack for our unison saws. Let's take our amp envelope up, increase the attack and release. And let's actually take a quick second to look at our filter. Then we'll come back and take a look at some of the wavetables. So we can activate our filters by clicking on this button here. Once I click, you can clearly hear that that's been activated. We've got volume control. Let's take that down because we are clipping. Now, of course, the cutoff is something that's popular to modulate, and this is really simple, in particular with LFO modulation and using a mod envelope, because these are pre-connected to the cutoff. So if you notice in the bottom left-hand corner here, we have LFO, and by default, we're on 1. So here we have our LFO 1. All we need to do to apply the modulation from LFO 1 is increase our knob here. I'll use my mouse wheel. Notice on the collar here, that's being taken up. I can then adjust this freely wherever I'd like. Now, hovering on the collar, I can increase that range as well. I can use the volume to control that also. The speed. Okay, now by default, this is going to be in a free mode for the speed, and we can adjust that here, but we can choose sync, and this is going to sync to the tempo of the DAW that we're using this in. Synthmaster One can actually run in standalone mode, but if you are using with a DAW, you can choose sync, and once we've done that, we can use the parameter here, the drop-down menu, and let's say we would like to sync that in quarter note. And let's actually double click to take our speed back to the default, because this is still going to affect our speed, and this will not be in perfect sync with our DAW if this is adjusted. So let's double click. We also have further control for the speed. We can do ×1, ×1.5, or divided by 3 there. We can also have a delay or attack. When we take the attack up, it's going to delay the time before this modulation is added to our oscillator. Let's take that up all the way. We can adjust our phase. We've got sample and hold. Noise. And by default, we're going to be in, our trigger mode is going to be in polyphonic, but we can change that to global, mono, or random here. Now, the last thing we'll talk about in LFO1 is the bipolar. So by default, this is going to be in unipolar. And you can see on our collar for the cutoff here, we're moving in a positive direction away from the setting that we have here. But if we like to work in bipolar, going to either side of this main setting, then we can activate the bipolar, and you'll notice we're now moving in a range either side of this setting here. And actually, one last thing, we can cycle through the different waveforms by using the left and right arrows here, but just if we left click, you can see that there's a ton of different LFO waveforms that we can choose from here. We've got some analog ones, so we can come and choose the, say, Mini 20 sawtooth and load that in. Let's take our sample, hold down. So we could really introduce a rhythmic feel to our pad or whatever sound that we're creating. Activate our second oscillator by clicking here. Let's take our unison up for oscillator 2. Detune, spread its width out. Let's take the amp envelope up the attack for oscillator 2 and the release. And this is a bit jarring, so let's take the volume down. Make that more subtle. Now, we can even quickly add modulation from envelope 1, or mod envelope 1, and we can see that that's actually pre-mapped to our filter as well. So by default, this is going to be on 1, mod envelope 1, but again, we can choose mod envelope 2 by clicking on the button, the same for our LFO. So, but let's leave that on 1, and all we need to do is increase this knob. And let's take our attack up. We can control the amount by using this knob here. I don't necessarily want to have too many of the high frequencies coming in on our attack. We can take our sustain down to bring that higher frequency back down and take our delay up to make that gradual. Okay, and just notice that in the window up above here, whenever we're hovering on these different modulation sources, we're going to get a display that shows us visually the adjustments that we're making to our ADSR as well as to our filter cutoff and the resonance. So if we take this up, we may want to apply some modulation to our resonance. And so say we would like to maybe say mod envelope 2. Let's click on this button and take that to our resonance. Let's hover on the collar and let's take that range a little bit down. Take our volume down, the speed. Okay, so adding modulation to different parameters is very straightforward, as you can see. Let's come down to the bottom just to show you that this is our mod matrix. We have matrix 1 and matrix 2. So we have 6 different sources that we can make use of and 12 targets below in mod matrix 1. In mod matrix 2, we have the same amount, so quite a bit of flexibility here. And you can see our modulation sources, LFO 1. Mod envelope 2 is being sent to filter 1 resonance. Now, whenever we're using LFO 1 or 2 or mod envelope 1 and 2 to our filter cutoff, we're not going to see those in our mod matrix because these are permanently assigned to the filter cutoff. Now we've seen that we can right click on our parameter and clear our modulations. You can see that that's been removed here. Within the mod matrix, we can also right click and choose none to clear these out as well. Let's come to LFO 1 and choose none and come back to our keyboard view. So let's actually left click and come back to our init preset and then click on our main oscillator. And let's come now to the wavetables because there's going to be a couple of differences here in our oscillator parameters. And we've taken a look at the tone and phase. But when we choose to work with a wavetable, let's come to, say, the root of sound, booster 1. So notice we now have index here. So we can use this to sweep through our wavetable. Now, of course, it's more fun to add modulation to take care of this. So again, if we'd like to do LFO 1, let's click on this button and drag that to our index. And we've immediately got our modulation. We can hover on the collar to set the range of this. We could choose bipolar, adjust the volume, speed. Let's add some unison voices. I'll change this to 3. Let's detune it. Take the width up. Put our reverb on. Now we can turn the volume up on our sub to get some low end in here. It may be a bit hard to hear, but we can use the semitone, and if I raise this up, let's take the attack up on our amp envelope and the release. The volume down on our sub. Now let's come to the mode for our sub-oscillator just to take a quick look at these modulation varieties. So amp mod, by increasing the volume, that's how we introduce the modulation to our main oscillator. semitone will have an effect as well. Using the left and right arrows, we can cycle through. Let's go on to the ring mod. Phase. And our frequency mod. Okay, and back to sub. So lots of experimental fun to have with these different modulation modes. And also just remember that we can, when we're in sub mode, we can use this as a noise generator as well. Let's come back to that noise, add white, pink, brown. Let's choose the brown. Take the volume of our main oscillator down. We can hear that there. Okay, I'm going to take the volume all the way down for our sub oscillator. And let's take a quick look at our routing. So as I mentioned, we can activate and deactivate our oscillators by clicking in this window, along with the button in the upper left-hand corner there. Now we can see our routing as well. So right now we default to series. So all four of our oscillators are going into filter 1. Filter 1 is going into filter 2. We can activate our filters by clicking. We can see that that's now active. Our filter 2, we can click here to activate that. We can also see the shapes of our curves and our amp envelope in these windows, as well as our waveforms that are active within sub 1 and 2 and oscillator 1 and 2. Now, if we'd like to change the routing, we can come up to this button here, clicking once, we can then choose split. And in this mode, our sub 1 oscillator and oscillator 1 are going to go directly into filter 1 and then to its own amp envelope and summed on the master output. Our sub oscillator 2 and main oscillator 2 will take a separate path into filter 2, then amp envelope 2, and then merge to our main output. Now we then have another mode, a third mode, which is parallel. And in this mode, all four oscillators will be processed in parallel mode by filter 1 and amp 1 and filter 2 and amp 2. So just to be clear about this, right now we only have oscillator 1 active, but this is being processed. This is going to be affected by our amp envelope 1 and amp envelope 2. So if I were to take the attack down here, let's take the reverb off for a moment. And if I were to increase the attack on amp envelope 2, we're not actually hearing that because we do need to activate filter 2. So let's click on that. Take our volume down a bit. Now, if I were to deactivate filter 2 and then come to filter 1, we could hear that that's also being processed by filter 1. And if I were to take the attack and release down on amp envelope 2, but increase on 1, Okay, so when we have filter 1 and 2 active, then both oscillators, all of our oscillators will be processed by both filters and amp envelope 1 and 2 in a parallel fashion. So adjustments that we make to either of these will affect all of our oscillators in parallel mode. But let's come back and left click and initialize, and by default we're going to be on series, back to originally how we were. And we're going to start to wrap up here. We'll take a quick look at the effects. Most of us already know what distortion, equalization, and things like this are. Compression, chorus. Just know that we have 6 different slots here. We can rearrange these by click, hold, and dragging up or down. Now we actually do have more than 6 effects. We're just limited to using 6 at a time, but we can right click on one of these effects, and then we have 11 in total that we can choose from. So if we wanted to add the phaser, then we could just choose that. Now, clicking, we show the different parameters for these effects. So if we'd like to activate our phaser, we can click on this button in the upper left-hand corner. The same for our delay, clicking this button here. Let's come to a different waveform. Okay, so traditional effects that we are familiar with, notice that we have a gear icon, so we can restore the defaults, copy these settings, and paste them into other effects. We can save presets if we like some of the settings that we've made to the parameters and use those in different patches. Coming to the equalizer, you can see we have the same options here as well. Also note that in our LFOs and our mod envelopes, we have the same gear icon where we can reset to defaults, copy the settings, paste, lock, and save presets. For our oscillators and filters, we have the same gear icon, same controls. Now to finish up, we'll take a look at the bottom panel here, and we've seen the keyboard layout. We've got our pitch and mod wheels. Now these buttons here are going to show modulation assignments for these particular parameters. So we have aftertouch, velocity, alternate. This is bipolar random, unipolar random, bipolar keyboard tracking, and unipolar keyboard tracking. So let's come to Mod Matrix 1 and let's choose for the source. I'll choose MIDI and aftertouch, and let's assign that to, let's come down to the bottom to our targets and assign that to our filter 1 resonance. Let's activate our filter. Take our rate up here. Let's actually alter that. Come back to our keyboard view. So you can see as I utilize the aftertouch on my external controller, we're seeing that adjustment, and that is because aftertouch is selected. If I were to select velocity, then we would see the assignments made for velocity or alternate or our bipolar random. But again, if we like to see our aftertouch assignments, we click on this button and we can see that on our resonance. Okay, now next we have this really cool scale feature. By default, this is going to be on chromatic, but we can click here and choose from different user presets. So if we like to say choose a 5-tone, the Priya here, we can see that the notes for this preset are now showing, and we can play in accordance with the highlighted notes. Or now when we choose that, we can still play chromatically on our external controller. So if I play chromatically, let's initialize. Okay, so we could still do the traditional chromatic, but if I choose fill octave, then we're only going to play the notes for this particular scale. So I just played chromatically on my external controller, but we're now restricted to the notes in this scale when we choose fill octave. Clicking again, we return back to the visual display of the preset that we've chose, but we can still play chromatically if we'd like. Now over to the right, we have glide, and we can choose the amount and the type. So let's switch the mode to mono. Take our amount up. So when I press and continue to hold a note and then press another one, let's just soften this up a little bit. Okay, we can hear that glide amount being added. Now, when we choose this, S is slide mode. So even if we don't hold a note while we trigger another one, we're still going to get that glide. So I'm pressing and releasing and then triggering another note, but we still have the glide. Okay, then we have our velocity curve for the MIDI coming into Synthmaster One. We have our vibrato, which we've already taken a look at, the attack and the speed. Let's change it back to polyphonic. Okay, and then let's come down to the settings. We've seen that we can add drift to our oscillators. We have our keyboard tracking amount. Notice we can also make adjustments to our pitch bend range, whether this is going to be in semitones. We can choose our engine quality and engine buffer, our global skin, and a variety of other settings as well. Let's come back to our keyboard view. Let's change our scale back to chromatic. And I think we can wrap up here. That pretty much covers the bulk, at least 90% of the parameters and features within Synthmaster One, besides the arpeggiator. Just know that we can access that here. And we have several different modes. By default, that's going to be on sequencer, but we can do chord, up, down, and so on. We can also expand this window by clicking on the magnifying glass to easier work with the sequencer and arpeggiator. We have volume control, swing, duration, and steps. We can use up to 32 steps within Synthmaster One. We can choose our bass time in relation to our song tempo. We can close out this larger view by clicking on the X or clicking again on the magnifying glass there. So just know that we can access the arpeggiator by clicking there. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. I hope that this has been useful for you if you're just getting started with Synthmaster One. It's a lot of information, so feel free to watch again in the specific areas. I'll leave a little index in the comments section so you can skip forward to the areas that are most interesting for you. Okay, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.